Welcome to Aging Insights. I'm Melissa Chalker, Executive Director of the New Jersey Foundation for Aging. The Foundation's mission is to enable seniors to live with independence and dignity in their communities. Aging Insights is produced by the New Jersey Foundation for Aging to provide information and resources to boomers, seniors, and caregivers. Often there are times in life when we are met with challenges. Sometimes they are physical or medical challenges, sometimes they're emotional challenges, sometimes both. The important thing to remember is there is always help. Today we're going to talk about a specific type of help, support groups. So whether you've just been diagnosed with a new medical condition or you've experienced a loss or any other number of scenarios, our guests today will tell you why seeking out a support group just might be what you need. I'm joined today by Helen Hunter, a Geriatric Care Manager, and Bill Dailey, a stroke advocate. So thank you both for agreeing to spend some time with me today. I think this is an important topic. Helen, I did want to start with you, and our audience, if they've been watching for a long time, might remember that both of you actually have been guests on the show previously. But Helen, as I said, you have joined us before, but just if you would remind our audience who you are and what your background is.
Yeah, so my name is Helen Hunter, and I've been a geriatric social worker, care manager for a number of years, and I specialize in home care and hospice care in dealing with elders and families, and I also am a pastoral minister. I run 2 churches in the area, and I provide a lot of counseling for folks who need those services, particularly elders and families who are struggling with the daily demands of caregiving, and way to go.
Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of that work has intersected with understanding that people need support groups and what the benefit of them are. So for our audience's purposes, if you could explain to us just what a support group is for people who might be wondering what that exactly means.
Well, support group meets regularly. They folks who may have the same physical or limitation condition, and they get together, and usually it's led either by somebody who has that condition or a professional, and they talk about their experiences, they talk about struggles or challenges they may have, and the goal of a support group is to really get together and have people share their information so they know they're not alone in going through. And this could be people who are diagnosed with an ailment or family caregivers.
Right. So, I mean, you've just mentioned already a variety of things, and that's kind of one of the important points we want to make today is that, support groups aren't just for one particular group or individual. They're for a variety of different issues that you might need support in.
Yes.
And so you've mentioned there are disease-specific support groups as well as those for caregivers. So, what are some of the benefits people might get from being in a room with people who are going through something similar?
Well, again, when you go to a support group with people who are going through the same kind of illness or dealing with daily demands of care, you get a sense of knowing I'm not alone. There are other people going through the same thing, and you may at first think, well, I don't want to say anything because I'm kind of nervous to be here, and you may listen more to people who are the veterans or the that have been there for a while, but it gives you a sense of knowing that you are in a group that will know what you're going through, and that they can help you to understand and to guide you through that process. And you can also help somebody else who may be more newly diagnosed and who is really going through a rough time, and they came maybe at the urging of a family member. They're not sure what this is all about, and so you could help them as much as they can help you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I want to get into that in a little bit. Sure. But you mentioned that if you're for the first time attending a meeting that you might not want to speak up or say anything. So could you maybe talk a little bit about what what someone might anticipate experiencing the first time they visit a support group?
Well, probably there's a bunch of people there, and they may not know anybody, so they may feel, oh, what am I doing here, and this is something that's really for me. But when people start sitting down and listening to other stories, they may feel that, yeah, that's something that I'm going through, and I really need to listen more to hear what this person's experiencing, and it can really help them to know that, one, again, I'm not alone, but two, that I can rely on calling that person, and we can hook up possibly and help each other out.
Yeah. So it is really, not just about what happens within the support group itself, but making other connections in the community.
Yes.
If you feel like you're really alone in what you're going through, meeting other people that you can stay in contact with outside of the group is good. That which leads me to another question, which might be, are there some basic rules or guidelines that usually are attributed to support groups? I know it might vary from group to group, but are there some basics that people should understand about going? Particularly, I think of things like confidentiality and that sort of thing.
Well, there are some support groups that do have that confidentiality. Not all, but like, for example, if you went to AA or Al-Anon or something like that, where maybe more you just don't want to say anything to anybody outside. If you're talking more about disease-specific group, I think that, again, keeping maybe that confidentiality, it's maybe not mandated, but it would be helpful. Because
it's probably something the group should have consensus on, I would imagine. Yeah.
And I think that there are some groups at the beginning of the group where they spell that out. So that way people know what to expect.
You talked a little bit about the apprehension people might have in attending the first time. What are some other obstacles that might prevent people from attending a support group?
Getting there. Big deal, particularly if you are not able to have the transportation to get there. It can be a physical limitation, which keeps you from getting to a support group, but also if you don't have anybody who can get you to there because of transportation issues. And so, the caregiver sometimes may want to go to a support group, but how do they let their loved one have the coverage of care if that's needed? So a lot of times organizations will have a support group for each. At the same time, they'll have one for the people with a disease or ailment and one for the caregivers. And that way, both groups can benefit in getting that support, and then they come together at the end.
Yeah. I think that's an important point. You mentioned caregivers, and I know in the beginning we talked a little bit about that being one group who might be in need of support in the form of a support group. But it's also important to realize that there may be two individuals here who are in need of support in different areas. One as the person dealing with a condition or chronic issue, and the other who is the caregiver and is in need of support for that particular concern. And so I think it's important to recognize the different needs, and as we mentioned, there are a variety of support groups that exist. And so I'm sure within that there are a variety of different forms that they take. But generally, I mean, what should people anticipate in terms of how often a group might meet and those sort of particulars?
Some groups meet weekly, some groups meet monthly. It really depends on the nature of the group and what they decide to do. In my experience, mostly it's either weekly or monthly.
Yeah, so I mean, this is not, I mean, when we think about people feeling like it's one more thing I have to make a commitment to, this is not a daily occurrence, of course, obviously depending on the type of group that you're interested in. It also might depend on where you live, right? I think we want to talk a little bit about how people can find support groups, which we certainly don't have time for in today's show to go through, because as we mentioned, there are so many different types of support groups, we couldn't possibly list all that are out there for people to join. But in general, if you are suffering from a particular condition, or if you have a particular need, there most likely is a support group for that.
Yes.
I mean, we talked about that a little bit. That's not a false statement, I take it.
Absolutely. And you could really find a lot on the internet. Just look up support groups for your specific ailment in your area. If you are an elder, there's a national educator locator, which is could do for any part of the country. If you're an elder, your aging office on aging. Hospitals, community centers, county offices would have a lot of that information.
Yeah, so there are many, obviously, there are those of us out there that say, we're just going to ask Google, because that's what we do, right? We just look to the internet for all of our answers. But if that's not something you're comfortable with or somewhere that you normally go for those type of information, that certainly some of the places you listed are a great resource to folks. Their county office on aging, their senior center, and there are other websites besides just going out there and trying your luck at a search engine. There are specific websites. You mentioned the Elder Care Locator. There are also some national resources for caregivers, as we mentioned how caregivers might need support, and so there are some national organizations that might have a listing on their website of groups and support for those things.
Absolutely, and if you have a specific ailment, if you again will look up or go online or just look up through a hospital, I have this condition, where can I go for support?
Right. We know a lot of, some of the local hospital systems in New Jersey are, are running community education programs, and as part of that, they might have also linkages to support groups for a particular condition or disease, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So those are some great places for folks to look. We've mentioned, caregivers a couple times, and I just want to give people an idea of, the level of what we're looking at in terms of statistics for that, because we realize that this is we have a growing need for caregivers, but it's also quite already a significant portion of the population. About how many people do you think in the United States are right now providing care for folks?
Probably anywhere between 45 and 50 million people. And these could be people who are spouses, these could be people, children, parents, grandparents, friends. So it really varies as to who is in that population.
Yeah. And right here in New Jersey, I think we have, about 2 million caregivers, is that correct? And these are people, as you said, who are, providing care for a variety of different individuals. I think it's important for us to mention that, when we're talking about support groups, this isn't just something for older adults or something for, people with a specific condition. This is, there are a variety of people who might fall into the category of needing a group of people to talk to who are going through something similar.
Right.
So whether you're a grandparent raising a grandchild, or you're a spouse caring for your husband or wife, or or a child caring for a parent, that these are very different roles, and there may be specific support groups for those individuals as well. Is
Absolutely.
That right? So, Helen, in thinking about the importance of support groups and how much they can help people, are there tips or advice that you would give people who are watching who might think, oh, that might be something for me, but I just really don't know if I want to do it?
I think what you really would need to do is go attend one session and see how you feel. Trust your gut. Some people, support groups are really not for them. They can deal with outgoing to a group where people share and they just want to deal with it on their own or get their own support from family and loved ones. Other people, they'll go and they'll just get welcomed by the folks that are there and they'll feel very comfortable. But my best tip or advice would be go anyway, because you may find that this is going to really help you. And if you find it's not for you, then you move on.
I think that's really great advice. And, when you're talking about that and saying, it might not be for everyone, I think that's the other important piece to mention here is that, not only is it not for everybody, but you should definitely go ahead and try anyway, because you don't know unless you do try.
That's true.
But just because you go and you don't feel like it's working for you, doesn't mean that another group might not work for you. Like you have to find the right fit as well. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And so, if you, unfortunately, there might not be that many groups for that specific issue in your area, but just because one group didn't work, shouldn't discourage someone from seeking out something else, right?
Right. And if you are that interested in being with a group, you could start your own. And people do that all the time. They may not find a group that works for them, but they say, I'll just get people together, we'll just talk and I'll form my own group. Yeah.
Well, I think that's, again, another great point because, we think of these support groups as being something official, and you think about a hospital system that might sponsor a group or give them space. But there is no reason or rules to say that you couldn't get together a group of people and ask if they wanted to come and sit and talk with you about this, because they're going through something similar. Right?
And in some cases, having a group where a person who has that ailment or condition is going through it is a real advantage too, because people who attend say, well, yeah, you're the professional in running the group and you may know a lot of the information, but you're not going through the daily grind, where somebody who has that experience and actually is running a group, for some people it really makes a big difference.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's also an important point to mention is that we mentioned that it could be either a professional facilitating the group or someone who has experience with the issue that the group is built around, and that could be a very important point for someone who's going to the group is that this isn't working for me because I don't really feel like this person understands because they haven't been through what I've been through. And that is the exact selling point we're trying to get across here with support groups, right? Is that this is a group of people who have been through what you've been through, and so it helps for you to cope and deal with your situation based on the experience of others. Right. One more thing I wanted to mention with you is that earlier on you spoke about how participating in a group could also mean that you can help someone, and so I think that's an added benefit that we could talk about support groups, about not only getting help yourself but being the helper, right?
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes people, particularly when they come in newer after you and are struggling, you can give your advice and give your wealth of knowledge and experience, and it could form a friendship, but also it could give them a peace of mind of knowing that, again, they're not alone. So, and it works both ways. You get the help, and then you can give to somebody else.
And it, all around leaves you with that good feeling of having done something good.
That's right.
Not only is the experience of having being able to be sort of a mentor, of whatever it is that your shared experience is, it's also that first time coming to the group and saying, I remember when I was sitting there for the first time and I felt uncomfortable, and, maybe reminding them that they don't have to talk this time, they can just listen, those sort of pieces of advice that, unless they're watching today, most people wouldn't know, right?
It's true, very true.
So I think these are all really great tips and points that you've given people, and a little bit of a better picture of what support groups are. And I want to turn to Bill, because Bill's got a little bit more he can share with us and shed a little bit of light on experience in support groups. So Bill, I want to also welcome you back to the show, because you have been with us before as well. And so I appreciate you taking the time to join us yet again. And last time you were here, you were particularly talking about your experience as a stroke survivor and sharing with people some tips and advice on that. And so today you're going to talk to us specifically about the support group piece. And so if you want to first maybe introduce yourself a little bit more and give us some background, and then tell us your experience with support groups.
Bill Dailey. I'm from Fort Lee, New Jersey. I had a stroke. It's ironic. Today's the 10th of October. I had my stroke on the 8th of October, 2003. So it's 15 years now since I've had a stroke. I also just want to say that everything that Helen offered you was phenomenal. You touched base on just about everything that needed to be touched. And if I was someone out there looking for information in a support group, you would have been high on my list of who I wanted to speak to. I did have one thing I wanted to interject. Helen and I have both been on twice now. This isn't like Saturday Night Live. Like if we're on 5 times, do we get a nice jacket?
I'll have to think about that. I have to think about if we have a prize for people who've been on. But it sounds like maybe you're lobbying to come back.
Yes, I think. You're very astute. My situation is basically somewhat different. I think there's just nothing that can surpass the ability of what a stroke support group can do for people. I was at a rehabilitation hospital in Morristown, and unlike many of the other hospitals who treat stroke patients, whether they're primary or comprehensive stroke centers, whatever their level of expertise is, there aren't that many hospitals that are affiliated with the main hospital in their group. And that was the situation with us. We had a rehabilitation hospital that was part of a large group of 5 or 6 hospitals that the parent company had under control. They contacted a bunch of, I guess, a lot of the stroke survivors in our group that had passed through that particular rehab hospital and asked us if we'd want to come to a luncheon. Nobody passes up free food, of course. The place was packed. And they asked us whether or not we would be able to offer them, we could offer them advice on how they could better treat their patients that are coming in through that institution in the future. And we sat down on, I guess it was March the 6th, I think, 2003. We discussed a few things with one meeting after another. And subsequently, our group in 2006 was formed. There were 3 of us, a caregiver, the facilitator from the rehab hospital, the stroke coordinator from the main hospital, and 2 other people, 2 caregivers with their husbands. It was just 3 of us. Our group is now expanded to, we have well over 100 people in our website database, I guess you guys would call that. And every week, the 3rd Thursday of every month, we have 40-some people that attend our meetings. It's actually, I think, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, in the state. I've been around to a number of different groups. as far as Pennsylvania into New York. And I've attended other groups from the outside looking in. They know who I was. Unfortunately, there were some groups, unfortunately, that felt that I was an interloper. I come from a system, a different hospital system in the state, and they really didn't want to break any bread with me and continue on in helping me seek out what I was looking to do.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
We progressed very rapidly. There were a lot of tears, of course, and I don't know whether or not you've experienced that, Helen. Tears are a predominant emotional, ability to let loose. Both the caregivers and the survivors. We went, I suppose, the hospital facilitated our group. They gave us a room through a very generous donation from one of the members of our group. We had a beautiful room put together with computers, with TV, able to videotape a lot of different stuff in the room. And that's how we started. The problem that I saw when I first started is that as far as stroke was concerned, and I don't know if it's the same situation with a lot of other diseases, but stroke is not a disease, is that even the patient and the caregivers were not really informed properly enough of what type of a stroke they had. And it just amazed me how many people would come in for the first time, and we would go around the room, and confidentiality was probably the main focus on it.
Right.
You didn't have to talk, and invariably when we first started, very few people knew what a stroke, what they had, what type was it. Was it a bleed? Was it ischemic? What is an ischemic stroke, etc. And that prompted me to begin to call out to different senior groups, basically is where I started, and picking up the phone on my own, just pell-mell, and ask them if they'd like to have a presentation made. And it was just amazing that outside of a few people that heard that I was just a volunteer at the hospital and didn't have any, DDD for dentist or any initials after my last name.
But I think you have, to Helen's point, you have the experience of what you went through, and who better to talk to people about that than someone who's been there, right? Isn't that the whole
and that's
premise?
exactly, that's the whole premise, exactly. And but people accepted me now. I guess I'm not here, you're not here, to toot our horns, but I love speaking, and we've had an opportunity to address almost 200 groups and over 13,000 people we've spoken to over the last 5 or 6 years.
Right. You've brought up some great points, and that, I appreciate the story of how your group started, because it really came from the idea that the hospital wanted feedback from people who'd received services there. But what really grew out of that was not only a network of people that are supporting each other and supporting the caregivers that are involved with the individuals who've been affected, but that you're also reaching out to the community and providing education, which is another great side effect, I would call it, of support groups, is that you really are providing people with an education, because there might be things about their condition they don't understand, and they can learn it from the group, but you're also going out into the community and providing that education separate from the group. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And even if it's not, it doesn't have anything to do with stroke, by 2030 or 2035, those are the dates that stand out as far as researchers are concerned. They feel that a lot of the major causes of stroke, diabetes, hypertension, cholesterol, those particular areas, obesity, those areas by that time are going to go up anywhere from 20 to over 30% an increase from right now, in the year 2015, we'll say. And whether or not you've had a stroke, or you're the caregiver taking care of someone who's had a stroke, and you're sitting at a meeting, it's so very important to understand these things, that you yourself, while you're taking care of someone, might be at the same time enabling yourself to be more adept at not taking the steps that you're doing. You're not drinking a little too much, you're too much sugar, whatever the case may be. And we're always trying to impress people that one doctor, you've got to be close enough to your primary care doctor than you are to your husband or to your wife. You've got to see these doctors once a year. You've got to do the proper testing. And a lot of different things can be brought to light when you do finish these particular programs with your doctor.
So you're doing education not just with people who've been affected by stroke, but those who you want to help to prevent that.
Exactly.
And I think you've made, again, some good points in that, we're seeing not only an increase in the number of older adults that will be part of our population by those years you've mentioned, which then also increases the percentage of people who might be experiencing a chronic condition, and as Helen mentioned, increasing the number of people who might be caregivers. And as we know, caregivers often aren't taking enough care of themselves,
Exactly.
because they're so concerned with their care recipient. And so I think that it's important that education piece you're doing is helping not only survivors and current caregivers, but prevention for folks who might be at risk of stroke or other conditions. Right?
And that particular area of caregiving. Now, our particular meetings, they run from 1 to 3. From 1 to 2. We will have 6 to 7 times a year, we'll have a speaker. Something that, of course, is definitely set with stroke in mind. We have 2 or 3 parties that we have for the year for holidays. But from 2 to 3, we break up. The survivors are left behind, and the caregivers have their own meeting. And that is just, as far as I'm concerned, the caregiver is the one important person in that room. They're the most important. They're the ones that will understand, will absorb more. They'll be more intent to write something down, and so they can realize, how important it is for them to be as solid as a rock. We know there's a lot of angst. There are people that'll tell us, "No, that's all right. My mother and father have been married for 45 years. They'll never have a problem. They'll never, that." Just doesn't happen. It's true.
No.
Okay, you've driven all your life. You've handled a checking account. You do all of the shopping. You're driving, which you have now are not able to do. There's an awful lot of angst in that particular area. And the caregivers, it's a good chance for them to get off their shoulder the problems that they have and how they address it, just as how we address it. How do I see a fellow teach me, who's in our group, how he gets up off the floor? Oh wow, because I've fallen before. This is somewhat, just something as simple as that, passing it on to the rest of the people in the group.
Well, I think you've just perfectly outlined for our audience what the benefits are of a support group, not only of exactly that support, the education, and also, mentioning holiday parties and gatherings. This is really about socialization as well, and avoiding that isolation that can come when you're experiencing a chronic condition. So I really appreciate that piece of the insight, and I can't thank you both enough for spending some time with me today, and I can't believe how incredibly fast that time went, but I do appreciate you both shedding some light on this topic for our audience, and I hope that you've encouraged people to seek out some assistance if they're in need of a support group. So, and thank all of you for sharing your time with us today. Aging Insights is produced by the New Jersey Foundation for Aging and is made possible by donations to the foundation. To become a sponsor of Aging Insights programs, please go to our website at www.njfoundationforaging.org or call us in the office at 609-421-0206. Our previous episodes may be viewed on our website. We'd like to remind you to find out about senior services in your area, please contact your county office on aging. Their numbers are also on our website, or you can call the state hotline at 1-877-222-3737. Thank you for watching this episode of Aging Insights, and remember, aging is everyone's business.